This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My guest today is Kimberly Clark Sharp. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Heather.
It is so great to have you here. I read your book many, many years ago. You can tell because I think this is a much older cover than the current cover out there, and it is an excellent book for people that are interested.
But I have a question.
Yes.
Bring that back up. Was that a hardback?
This is a hardcover, yeah.
Would you take off the cover and look at the binding?
Yes, I will.
Wonderful listeners.
It's hard to see it.
I think you've got a collector's edition.
Really?
What does my name say?
It says Kimberly Clark Sharp.
I'll get back to you on that. You may have a collector's item. There was a first press, but it had a binding error.
Okay.
They had to pull it back, but book collectors jump on things like that. It's like people who collect stamps and they're looking for the upside down stamp.
Mm-hmm.
So it drove the price of the book up to like $40 for a while. But then William and Morrow, who did the hardback publishing, corrected it with a dark blue binding. So I think you have the collector's item.
Well, it's too precious for me to give up or to sell. But you know what I should do is bring it to Ian's and have you sign it next year.
I would love that. Well, I guess I'm making faces and talking about the book. But the book is called After the Light, though. And I am proud of it because I wrote that thing myself, handwritten, eight versions, submitting it to my editor, William Morrow, back in the day. And it was a lot of work. And people who write like that, I salute you. It's a lot of work. So thank you, Heather.
And it's very well written. You pulled it together beautifully after number 8. It really is a great book. So I do recommend it. And what it's about, of course, is, Kimberly, you had a near-death experience, and it was when you were coming out of the Department of Motor Vehicles. And for anybody who's ever been in line at the DMV, they probably are not surprised to hear that that's where you had your near-death experience.
You know, it's really a serious subject, but I can't help but make a joke. Because, to be at the DMV and have a near-death experience, my joke is, you should have seen my photo. You too would die. I mean,
exactly.
It's just such a weird place to, drop dead.
So take us to it. Tell us about it.
There's two perspectives, my dad's, who I was with, and mine. The year was 1970, and I was in college, but needed to renew my driver's license. I'd let it slip, so I had to start again. And, want to get a car at some point. So we went to the Department of Motor Vehicles in Shawnee Mission, Kansas, where I am from. And it was a normal Saturday day. I just don't remember it. Except for something about feeling funny, wanting to sit down, and my dad saying there weren't any chairs. And I have no memory for the day. But I'll tell you what my dad's memory is first, because that lays the groundwork for what I do remember, which would be what we now call a near-death experience. But we were leaving the DMV. We had stepped outside. We're, I guess, in the doorway when I just collapsed. And my dad tried to catch me, but really dead weight. And it sounds like a pun, but it's true. Dead weight weighs more than living weight. So he couldn't hold me. And then we were on the sidewalk. Happened to be a uniformed nurse passing by. I mean, what are the odds? But she ran over, decided that I wasn't getting a pulse, didn't look like I was breathing. 2 calls were made. One to a local Kansas City, Missouri hospital, the closest good ER to my body. And then the Shawnee Mission Department of Volunteer Firefighters. Well, volunteer firefighters arrived first. They had a brand new portable ventilator that had 2 functions. One, of course, to ventilate, but the other to vacuum. because sometimes objects are in the airway. That's why we tell our kids, don't run with candy in your mouth. The airway needs to get unblocked for the air to then get through. So they applied a seal, the mask, to my face, again, according to my dad, turned it on, but it was a new packaging. They hadn't played with this machine yet, and it was on vacuum mode. So it was immediately apparent that something was terribly wrong. They did flick the switch, started pumping air in, but our lungs are sticky, especially coming against each other's tissues. And that had happened. So the air that was being pushed in could not entirely fill my lungs, but it had to go somewhere. So it did. It went all over my body, and I basically blew up like a balloon, a flesh balloon. There's a name for that. It's called epithelial emphysema, usually fatal. Anyway, the firefighters were distraught. Again, according to my father, they could not revive me. They turned to my dad and said, I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do. There was a crowd around my body at that time. And again, according to my dad, this guy came from the back and he was pushing people aside, swearing a lot. So our joke is that he was from Missouri, because no one in Kansas would swear.
Of course.
So there is humor around this within my family eventually. He pulled the firefighters away from my body and started what we now call mouth to mouth and chest compressions. By the way, mouth to mouth is no longer necessary in a citizen CPR situation. Just pump like crazy on, 2 finger lengths down below the breastbone, and that's all you need. But at that time, he was giving me mouth to mouth and chest compressions. Then he gave up and turned to my dad and said, I'm not getting a blankety blank thing. My dad's memory ends at that point, except later, the ambulance had arrived from the hospital. My body was put in the back. My dad jumped in the back. Off we went to the medical center, to the ER, where things went sour again. But, I hate to give away the ending of a good book, but she lived. But so that's my dad's memory. My memory, so different, except for the beginning. I do remember hearing a woman's voice to my left saying, I'm not getting a pulse. I'm not getting a pulse. And I felt like I was talking to her and said, of course you're getting a pulse, or I wouldn't be talking. It was that, like, hello. She ignored me. So I thought, well, I'm going to ignore her. And I don't know if it was like a near-death snit that I got into, but I was out of there. I found myself then in a different location. I was surrounded by gray fog. It was warm. It was comforting. I knew I wasn't alone, but because of the fog, I couldn't see who else was there. I had complete confidence that I was in the right place. And I felt like I was at the airport waiting to board. I've got my boarding pass, so we're just hanging out, waiting to get on the airplane. It was comfortable. Then something happened that I don't have words for, but let's call it a light. A light exploded underneath me, and oh, Heather, it was so powerful. It just went everywhere. And when I say light, that's where I lose my words, because it was brighter than a million suns. But I say that without even having to look at one sun in my life. I'm not going to do that. So I don't know where I get the million suns brightness, but it was the power of it as well. It was just thunderous and incredible and brilliant. And in the presence of this light, I said, homie home. Homie home is what I learned later from my parents, is what I used to say when I was learning language and I was in the car and I recognized the neighborhood. I'm going to get back to, our home, my toys, all that. And I would say, homie home, homie home. I don't remember ever saying that, but I was firstborn. It was one of those Gucci goo moments. So homie home is what I used to say. Homie home seems to be my heaven, my God. When I say God, I don't mean that religiously, by the way. I just go back to no words, creator, I don't know what, but this light was my homie home. And the light spread out in all directions. I could see as if I had eyeballs, and I could see that it went everywhere forever. It was like, it was like linear time, but I was beholding eternity. How I knew that, I just knew it. But at the same time, the light was doubling back on itself in layers, and I somehow understood, oh, those are dimensions. Also, I couldn't see the end of it. And we live in a three-dimensional world. So there's a lot more going on than I'd ever been taught in Kansas anyway. I loved it. I loved being there. I asked questions that anyone would ask. The communication was perfect, but it was in math and music. And when skeptics say, oh, people get what they're expecting, it's like, I have no music skills. I have no math skills. Zero. To this day, I just don't. And yet, it was perfect. To interrupt my own discourse here for a moment, since then, there's been a lot of brain studies done. The field has developed way, so has the field of child development and stuff. And my understanding is that until about age 10, our brains don't know the difference between math and music. So the conventional wisdom is expose your children or grandchildren to music before age 10. It'll help with the math skills down the line. Go figure. All right. In parentheses, thank you for listening. Anyway, I did ask questions like, why are we born? And it was basically, well, you banged on the door to be born. It's like, this is on you, kiddo. And on like that. It was just wonderful. Then I was told what I didn't want to hear, and that's that I had to go back. I had a lot at stake. I'm with the ultimate love. I'm ecstatically happy beyond words. So I said no. And I'm here to tell you, you can argue with God or whoever that thing is that doesn't have words. But I lost that argument. I was sent back. However, I missed my body by about 3 feet, which is about how close I came to the curb in my driver's test to parallel park. I couldn't get closer than that, so I didn't pass my driver's test. So that had just happened. Now I'm about the same distance from my physical body, which I can see again. And all I could think of was, I can't even park myself. I mean, it was like I'm spatially challenged in addition to music and math, I guess. So, but I could see, even though there were legs in the way, and I had no attachment to that body. I knew it was me. I didn't look good. And what am I doing on the ground? Didn't even occur to me to ask. But the me, that was Kim, was not in that body, but was watching everything. Then I saw a man, I didn't know who he was, bend over that face and put his mouth on that mouth. Well, that was what my dad called the Good Samaritan, the stranger that came swearing so much through the crowd. The moment his mouth touched my physical mouth, I went back into my body. But I went through him. And going through him, I knew everything about the guy. Not his name, but how he was feeling and his frustration. Part of him was feeling like a complete idiot because I wasn't responding and all that stuff. And but mainly, I, even in the moment, knew that he loved me. And his love was the form of compassion. Well, compassion is a very high level of love. So I'd just been with the greatest love of all in this light. So, of course, I'm going to gravitate to love. and did. So I was back in my body, and it was dreadful, Heather. I mean, it was really awful. It was dark and dank, and I didn't like it. So I'm a really good whiner anyway in life. So I whined to God. I have a lot of experience whining. So no, take me back. I don't want to be here. You know, I want to go home, home. Well, God showed up again. How nice. And said, okay, all right. But first, and then this portal opened to my right. And I understood that to be my heaven. And it was grass and sky, and off the distance, kind of a whitish fence and some low growth or shrubbery or low trees, not sure. And yet it wasn't earthly. The grass was so intense. What I've come to do, this is recent, so I'm going to quote myself, but the grass wasn't green. It was green. And the sky wasn't blue. It was blue. Just the vibrancy and the intensity of the chroma, if you will, of the colors. Also, I could sense what every blade of grass was. It was like the grass had its own level of consciousness, you know, different from mine, but it was there. Anyway, I wanted to go, so it was like, goodbye. Then I was told that if you go through, you won't be coming back. That portal thing, that window thing, is your border. So it's like, thanks for the info. And then an interruptive God, again, not religiously, and I'm making light of something that means a lot to me, but there was like an explosion of light. And I was told that if I chose to live, I would be living, boom, there. And all I could see is where mountains met water, which, you know, no GPS, thanks, which would be God PS. I didn't care. I mean, it wasn't Kansas. Definitely wasn't Kansas. So I ignored it, wanted to go off to my heaven. There was another flash of light, and it was a gallery of people with captions underneath I could read, like in English, even though the communication was still in this math and music stuff. And I was told those people would be significant in my life if I chose to live. Well, they were strangers, so what did I care? So, okay. And I'm off to grassland. Then there was a third flash of light. It was me being of service. And I said, cool. I meant that as an adjective, Heather, not as a decision, but God or whatever took it as confirmation that I was going to return to life, and I was back. And then I was back for good. So I was interested in my medical records when I wrote After the Light, because I hadn't even read them. So I ordered them, the copies, and the emergency room admit notes from the ER doctor said, reason for admission, cardiac, ? Simple faint, low blood pressure, ? Resuscitation impaired or something like that because of a snafu with the ventilator. Basically, I died of a snafu. So, given my tendency to be sarcastic at times and goofy a lot, along with my seriousness, yeah, so I died of snafu. Coming back was when people say, I wish I could have a near-death experience. My response is, are you crazy? Because the body takes a big hit. And my body took a hit, but I did recover. And then set out to find where mountains met water. What happened is that I did buy a car. I did get a driver's license. I bought a VW Squareback in green, called it the Green Weenie. I left Kansas. I swear I rolled over my mother lying in the driveway, that I was going to be leaving home to what? But I was determined. And I had very little with me, a trunk, an ironing board, and in the front seat, my hamster. in a bird cage. My hamster's name was Toto. So Toto and I left Kansas, not smoothly though, to tell you the truth. I was scared. I'd been to college, but Kansas State University, just 2 hours from my home. What in the heck was I doing? And I began to regret my decision, even about coming back. So I'm on the highway approaching what was then a toll booth, Interstate 70, which is east-west. And I figured, well, the mountains were west, so I headed in that direction. But the weight of my decision of leaving my family, my state, my friends, my everything was horrible. So I began to cry. I don't want to change. I want to go back. No, I don't want to change. I don't want to change. And then I came upon a sign, big, that said, change needed. So I thought, oh, yeah, funny. I could use a Kleenex then. And my maiden name is Kimberly Clark. There is a Kleenex paper company called Kimberly Clark. My mom probably put it between the seats. I don't remember her doing that. But I looked down and there's this white box with black letters. It was Kleenex. And it said Kimberly Clark. So honk. And then after all kinds of adventures, for instance, Toto and I had to pull off in Hays, Kansas because of a tornado. Not a big bad tornado, but I didn't want to be out on the road. And eventually we made our way to that place where mountains meet water, which turns out to be Seattle, Washington. I tried out other places though, and I was young and had a car, so it was fun. So there was Denver, there was Rocky Mountains, but there was Salt Lake City, there was Lake Tahoe, there was San Francisco, where actually I did pretty well. I stayed a bit in San Francisco, and I fit right in with the hippie community there. I became a hippie. It was, peace and love, man. I mean, I loved it. But I actually lived on Haight Street and in the Haight-Ashbury district, in the heart of everything. But I thought it was so ironic. I was so filled with love. And yet I lived on a street named Haight. So stuff like that kept coming to my attention. Synchronicities. When in Hays, Kansas, I actually spent the night with a friend from college. And she decided to go with me the next day, packed a bag, and off we went. There was a being in our car, and this is where things can get weird, after effect wise with near-death experiencers, is that sometimes heightened awareness brings in way heightened awareness. And I just felt like there was an invisible being in the car that at times would even take over. When I was writing After the Light, which is filled with lots and lots of people's stories, not just mine, I wanted everyone I was writing about to sign off on it. And there were people I couldn't find, so I hired a private detective. And this private detective found my companion in the car. She has a name. I got a hold of her and said, I'm writing this book, but it's really weird because I felt like when we were in the car together, there was this invisible being that could even take the steering wheel. And I babbled on thinking, oh. And then she let me finish. She said, yeah, I know, but it was with me, not you, Kim. So that was a shock. And after we got to Seattle, I didn't sense that anymore. But she had moved on. So it went with her. It pays to sometimes be really honest, even though one feels foolish in that honesty, because you never know what you're going to get from listeners who go, oh, wait, that happened to me. And I get a lot of that. Or I've never told this to anybody. Or you're going to think I'm crazy, but. So I love those stories. So I open my mouth these days a lot, and I hear a lot. And it's been wonderful.
And I am so glad you do. And I know the listeners and viewers out there are so glad as well, because we love hearing stories like yours. And for everybody that is watching and listening, stick around, because I've got a lot of questions, hopefully questions that are digging in a little bit deeper. So we will talk about those things coming up in the next episode. And before we head out, if you want to give it a like, that would be wonderful. And please leave a comment too. Kimberly and I would love to hear your thoughts on what we're talking about. So Kimberly, I will see you in the next episode.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks so much for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. That was part 1. Make sure to listen to part 2. And if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more episodes.